Okay, we're in chapter 10, the laws of Teshuva of the Rambam. We said so far is that even though everyone should desire the world to come and desire the time of the Messiah, because that will give us the means to be able to get to the world to come, but when it comes to doing mitzvahs, the ideal is to do the mitzvahs only out of love, not for the sake of any gain or prevention of any loss, personally. Doing for the sake of earning a gain or preventing a loss is called serving God out of fear, yira in Hebrew. That's valid service, and it will be rewarded. And we train people when they're young and not well educated to serve God that way. When they achieve a certain level of understanding, then they're qualified to be taught to serve God out of love. Not that they automatically graduate to love, they're qualified to be taught to serve God out of love. Many will never graduate. Rambam says serving God out of love is a rare achievement. But they can move in that direction. They can improve. They can perhaps add flashes of love. This is the level of Abraham in particular. The goal is to achieve love of God, and then when he says you achieve love of God, then the motivation of serving God out of love alone and not out of fear will come automatically. So it isn't a piecemeal process. It isn't a action by action process. It's achieving a state of loving God, and when one has that, then the motivation will follow automatically. And we are commanded to achieve this, even though, as I pointed out, your translator put in parentheses, commanded us to seek this rung, but the mitzvah of Yahavta Hashem Elokecha, you shall love Hashem your God, that doesn't command you to seek. I'm going to put in one sentence now what's a whole hour shir, but just to be on record. You can be commanded to do something even if you're not able to do it because you're not blamed or penalized in any way for failure to accomplish it. The fact that it's beyond your abilities doesn't mean you don't have an obligation. It means that failure is not punishable. But the obligation is there. The obligation is written in the verses, and that should not be compromised. Of course, when it comes to something like love, there are various steps you can take to try to generate love in yourself, develop love in yourself. That's what you can do practically. But the command is not to do the effort. The command is to achieve the outcome, even if, at the present time anyway, it's beyond your capability. That's what we learned yesterday. If there are questions about that now, I'll be happy to talk about them. Others will push on. Yeah?
What do you think the biggest obstacle to achieving that, like serving God out of love is?
The way I put it, that would have to be the obstacle to coming to love God. I don't know. I take your question to be psychological, and I don't know if there'd be one answer to that question. I think it would vary from person to person. Sometimes it's the events that happen to a person or the events they're aware of. Sometimes it's elements in their character which could prevent it. There is something which the current buzzword is cognitive dissonance. A person says, if I commit myself to that, it's going to cost me my cheeseburgers, or something else that he doesn't want to give up. So he can't bring himself to even work on it because he's conflicted. That could be a barrier for some people. So I don't know if we could talk about what's biggest in general. I think it would be not possible to say. Question? Yeah.
So, we learned that for Abraham was the other way around, that he had all the service to Hashem out of love, and then he had the Kedah, which brought him to experience the...
So this is what they ask. Didn't Abraham also serve God out of fear? And the Gemara in Sota, I think, is addressing that in part, where it says that his fear, his yira, was an outgrowth of his love. It wasn't separate. It wasn't a different characteristic. It was an outgrowth of his love. One simple way of explaining it, there are others that would require more time. One simple way of explaining it is this, I forget which sefer I saw this. Love is a very precious thing. People, in many people's lives, love is the most precious thing that they have. Now suppose you came to be aware that doing Q might cost you that love, would compromise that love. You could then, quite rationally, develop a great fear of doing Q, because it'll cost you what you love. But that's not fear as opposed to love, or separate from love, or independent of love, or in addition to love. That's fear because of the love. So that's what the Gemara is saying, that the love, the fear that Abraham learned to express there was the fear that grew out of the love. That's not what the Rambam is talking about here. He's talking about fear as a separate thing, which could be independent. A person could serve God with it independently. This fear you could never do that with. Now, in paragraph 3, he asks, what is the proper degree of love? Now, just listen to this. That a person should love God with a very great and exceeding love until his soul is bound up in the love of God. Thus, he will be always obsessed with this love as if he is lovesick. His thoughts are never diverted from the love of that woman, a man who is lovesick, what we call infatuation. He's always obsessed with her. When he sits down, when he gets up, when he eats and drinks. With an even greater love, the love for God should be in the hearts of those who love him and are obsessed with him at all times, as we are commanded. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul. This concept was implied by Solomon in the Song of Songs, which Solomon composed, when he stated, as a metaphor, I'm lovesick. And there it's a strict translation, cholas ava, I'm lovesick. The totality of the Song of Songs is a parable describing this love. Okay, that's what he says. Now let's take it apart piece by piece. Continuous, never interrupted mental experience. Continuous, never interrupted mental experience. One could ask about this if it's healthy. I mean, is that good for a person? If you have just the words on the page, you could ask the following question: does that mean he becomes one-dimensional? Does the love crowd out everything else? No room for anything else? I don't think we would recommend that for someone. Wouldn't be healthy. Now here's something that's very important. Some experiences crowd out any compromise with anything else. And some don't. And some can be specifically inclusive, even though they occupy the person continuously, they can be inclusive. Take, for example, a person is pushed into an automobile lane when he's standing and he's about to fall down in front of the traffic. I don't think he'll be wondering about his stocks or what he's having for supper or whether the sky is blue. I don't think any of that will compete with the experience that in the next 5 seconds I might be dead and doing something drastic to avoid that. That kind of fear takes over a person's consciousness and doesn't allow anything else in. Similarly, a person who's playing sports seriously, the quarterback has to pass the football to the end zone, to one of his receivers. He's not thinking about the trophy after the game. He's not thinking about playing next week in Montreal. He's thinking about getting the ball to the receiver in the end zone, period. These kinds of experiences crowd out everything else. But let me give you a contrasting example. is something which I hope that you will all go through, probably not in the too distant future. You're engaged to get married. And you're planning the wedding. So you're hiring a hall and hiring the musicians and planning the menu and the flowers and the designs and the time schedule and so forth and so on. And you're talking with people and you're negotiating with prices and making choices. Do you forget about your bride-to-be while that's going on? Listen, I'm talking to the caterer now. How can I think about her and talk about the caterer? Excuse me, I think you're thinking about her all the time. While you're negotiating with the caterer and while you're looking at you're planning the order of people coming down the hall and the invitations and all the rest, you're thinking about her all the time. The fact that you're going to marry her is a thought that accompanies you all the time while you're doing all the other things that you're doing. It doesn't make you less competent to do those things either. You'll negotiate with the people you have to pay just as well, maybe better. It doesn't compete, it's inclusive. It doesn't compete, it's inclusive. Now take an example of someone where you're already married. Now, if we're worried about love specifically, crowding out other options. Well, I love my wife and I love sunsets. My wife also loves sunsets. And here we are together watching the sunset. What shall I do now? Because I love my wife. And I know a minute for my wife and a minute for the sunset. I go back and forth because, love is inclusive. I enjoy the sunset much more because I'm sharing the experience with my wife. And sharing beautiful experiences is one of the things that helps meld and strengthen the love I have for my wife. They don't compete with one another. They reinforce one another. This kind of love isn't exclusionary. The contrary. A person who's really deeply in love with another person, the person could be never absent from his mind, but that doesn't mean he can't do other things and bring them into the relationship and bring the relationship into them. So I think that what you have here is an example of a kind of, you can call it a fixation, because he does say it's continuous, and the fixation doesn't exclude, you don't become one-dimensional. That's one point. Now what about with all your heart? There too, a person might think, if I love with all my heart, does that mean I don't have any heart left to love anything else? Is God really asking me to love him and only him? Well, that's dead wrong. Here, quiz time. Why is it dead wrong to say that God has asked me to love him and only him? Because he gave us a commandment to love other people. Thank you very much. Particularly, you have to love Jews. So it couldn't be that he wants us to love with all our heart, which means our whole heart for him and have no heart for anybody else. That can't be right. So somehow, you can love him with all your heart and also love others. The heart can be dedicated to more than one, and it doesn't mean that only part of the heart is dedicated. Let me give you a concrete sort of legal example. When you have partners who own property, I don't know how it is in other legal systems, but let's say they own a field. Two people, Reuven and Shimon, they own a field. It's not that Reuven owns half and Shimon owns half. No. Reuven is a part owner of the whole field. And Shimon is a part owner of the whole field. But the whole field is owned by each of them together with the other one jointly. So here, the idea that your heart is available doesn't mean that you've sequestered part off and said, this part won't love God because I have to have it for my other Jews. So I'll use this part for the Jews and the rest of it I'll use for God. No! I can use my whole heart for God, and the same whole heart can also love others. That's why it's not competitive. Someone who has this kind of love of God is not one-dimensional, and not only not one-dimensional, but he can love other things as well. And he carries his love together with all of those other things. So let's suppose, for example, this person has a wonderful love relationship with another person. He understands that God's running the world. That relationship is only available to him because God makes it available to him. The very fact that he has that wonderful relationship leads to greater love of God. So it doesn't compete, it reinforces. And vice versa, if the love of the other person is based on serving God as it should be, then his love for God spills over into his love for the other person. So even though on the face of it, these words might be misunderstood as exclusive and therefore unhealthy. Now here's the key punchline here. Human experience teaches us that it's not unhealthy. And this is the answer to what the question is addressing at the end of the paragraph. You're talking about love of God. Why are you using as an example to teach this idea infatuation for a man with a woman? Why is that the parable? Why is that the model? Why is that the resource for teaching the idea? And if you're going to point the finger at Maimonides says, well, point it at Solomon. He did exactly the same thing. Okay, but why did Solomon do it? Well, Solomon's writing with Ruach HaKodesh, with Holy Spirit. So it means that God is providing that. You learn something very deep here, that spiritual concepts are not natural for the soul when it is in contact with the body. We've mentioned this on prior occasions. The soul is in contact with the body. A great deal of the soul becomes inaccessible to consciousness. You have no experience whatsoever of the higher reaches of your soul. So says the Ramchal, word for word. And the concepts which would be natural to the soul in and of itself are lost. The soul is sort of focused, you could say demoted to being the guiding element in dealing with this world, in this environment. And therefore to communicate spiritual ideas to the soul in this environment requires it to be communicated through physical examples. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to communicate it. Physical, human, this worldly examples. I mean to reduce a human being to physicality. I'm not on that page philosophically. So this is true across the board. Rav Gifter, wrote an introduction to the Art School Song of Songs. I heartily recommend it. It's 3 pages in Hebrew. A very early art scroll work with something that's in Hebrew and not in English. There's a reason for that. One reason is that if you can't read Hebrew, you probably shouldn't be learning it. You're not on a level where you can appreciate it. And he quotes from a medieval mystic who says, listen carefully because people don't hear the words as they're spoken because they don't expect to hear it. A person, he says, a man who has not felt desire for a woman is like a donkey and less than a donkey. A man who has not felt desire for a woman is like a donkey and less than a donkey. Why would you say that? Isn't the highest level of a man never attracted and never... Well, apparently not. Apparently not. There's something to be learnt from sexual desire. One thing is, what you learn is you are capable of becoming fixated on one thing, very highly motivated to get that one thing, and you don't regard that as a sickness. That shows you how fixated you could possibly be on God also. You now know that that's part of your character. It's part of your personality capabilities. So that's what you want to strive for in your relationship with God. Otherwise, again, the verbal description would sound like a sickness, would sound like a disease, and would sound like something very undesirable. So human experience teaches you how to understand the spiritual concepts we're talking about. Just reading this afternoon the Maharal, Moshe Rabbeinu asked the Kadosh Baruch Hu to be shown things. Why do we say the 13 attributes of mercy? So the Gemara says that God, so to speak, acted them out. Moses saw a guy with a talis on, acting out prayer. How to pray. So the Maharal asks, he didn't ask for the text. He said, Hareini, show me your ways. Apparently this is something which couldn't be learned by just being told what the text is. It has to be demonstrated to him how the prayer should be done. Prayer. Yeah, you need a demonstration. You have to see it. You don't see it, because Baruch Hu has to give a vision of, so to speak, something in human form, performing a human activity, in order for this spiritual concept to be understood. This is a very deep principle. Rambam is applying it here and takes the Song of Songs as his basis, as his background authority. Yeah.
Can you clarify what that means when you say when the soul gets in touch with the body and it like affects our spirituality? Can you explain that a bit further?
Not sure I can explain it more. Maybe a very, very rough analogy would be a man driving a car, right? He can't read a book while he's driving a car. He can't, scratch his feet with both hands. Why not? Who's stopping him? What law says you can't? We just can't drive a car doing that. Driving a car requires certain posture and certain attention, and when you're doing that, you can't do other things. So the soul coming into this world and to interact with the body requires it to have a certain focus, a certain connection, and that deprives it of its ability to do other things which it would be able to do if it wouldn't be connected to the body. And then if you want to communicate something which is above the bodily state, you've got to do it through the way it exists with the body, because that's its current state, its current condition. Just like we saw a few days ago, when, according to Rambam, Moses asked God to understand him. Harini nos kodecha. Again, it's Harini. Show me your essence. And God says, no one can see me and live. Again, see. Maral points this out. I didn't hear it so clearly before. Right? Which means after death he can. And we saw at the end of chapter 8 says explicitly that after death he can. That Shechina means enjoying the understanding of God's essence, but only after death. So in this world you can't have that. The connection with the body costs the soul some of its powers to be exercised. Not that the soul doesn't have the powers, but it can't exercise the powers while it's connected to the body. Okay, now, having said all of that, let's look at paragraph 4 to see how paragraph 4 fits with the previous. The sages of previous generations declared, should one say, I will study Torah in order to become wealthy, in order that I should be called rabbi, or in order to receive reward in the world to come, benefits of material benefit, or social benefit, or even the world to come, should he do that? Now, that question has been answered already in gold, right? Rambam has answered it. But now he's quoting something that the sages said. The Torah teaches, it says, if you are careful to observe my commandments, and then the verse goes on to say, to love God. Then it has all sorts of promises. But the verse specifies, this is what I want from you. I want from you to do the commandments out of love. That always should be done only out of love. The sages also said, there's a verse in Tehillim, in Psalms, desire his commandments greatly. That's an interesting statement. Desire his commandments. And they say, since the verse says to desire the commandments, it means the commandments, not the reward that comes from the commandments. So now, and before I go to the end, let's just think about this a little bit. What is a commandment? Yeah.
Is it desire is a commandment, or it's a commandment to desire?
No. The verse in Tehillim says, "B'mitzvosav chafetz ba'od." This person desires, delights, longs for God's mitzvos, the commandments. He desires and delights and longs for God's commandments. So the Talmud then says, okay, the verse is telling me for the commandments. That means not for the reward of the commandments. That would mean that the commandments are only a means to something else. No, the verse says, chafetz, lachpot, something is very powerful, all-encompassing desire, appreciation, hope. What is a sheaf in English? longing for. It focuses all the positive aspects of your personality, and it's in the mitzvos and not the reward. Now, let's remember what we said up until now. The ideal is to serve God out of love. Remember the analogy of the two brothers? Remember the brother who served his father out of love? When he got the telephone call at 2:30 in the morning, what did he think? Wow! My father needs me. An opportunity to show my father my love, to express my love to my father. It's a precious opportunity. That's what the Rambam is saying here. I have an opportunity to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I have an opportunity to show and express my love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's very precious. This isn't because he's going to give me something later. It's precious for me now. Someone who serves out of love is going to feel this way. Now, it's not only as if, so to speak, I'm acting at a distance. The commandment and the performance of the commandment connects me to him. Remember, which parak was this in? The seventh parak, I think, where he says that the goal that when you're doing tshuva is to be mudbak bo. And I told you, someone asked me, where does the Rambam talk about dvekus? Mudbak means attached to. It's the same word as dvekus, devek, mudbak. Right? So the goal is, by serving him, to become attached to him. So if the commandments are my mode of attaching. If I love someone, I want to be in that person's presence. I want to interact with that person. I want to do things that are good for that person. And by the way, this is something which only came to me fairly recently. Some people, some cynics will claim, you want to do good things for the person you say you love because you want to feel like you're a giver. You want to feel like you're competent and you have a surplus and you can thereby provide for somebody else. You're just building yourself up. You're just building up your ego. You think you're doing it for the other person, but it's not true. I would like to ask such a person whether he's cynical about his own cynicism. Hey? Same thing with the famous critics. Very critical. Does he ever criticize his own criticism? Probably not. Ask that question. It's not a bad question. But here, there's a measure. There's a way you can test it. The person I love needs X, and I'm working to give X to the person I love, and somebody else gives X to the person I love, and the person I love is happy. Am I happy? Or am I disappointed? Okay. If the cynic is right, then I'm disappointed. But if I'm happy, the cynic is wrong. If I'm happy because my beloved is happy, not because I made the beloved, or not only because I made the person happy, when the person whom I love receives something that makes that person happy, then I'm happy for that person whom I love, then I'm not doing it just because I'm building up my ego as a giver. And I think that's quite reasonable. That's quite reasonable. Right? Maybe this will be easier for you to grasp because you haven't been on that level yet. But with children, you have children. Someone does something good for your child. Say, yeah, I didn't get to do it. I wish my child didn't have it. Never. My child is in a good position. My child has something good. That's wonderful. No competition there. So this is the idea of a mitzvah chofetz ma'od. There's a tremendous desire for the commandment because in the commandment I can show my love. In my commandment I can be connected to the one whom I love. That's why it's not the reward of the mitzvahs. That's later somewhere else, which I do want. I do want that. But I want the mitzvah for the sake of the mitzvah itself. And the way, the Rambam hasn't said this explicitly, but implicitly in what he's saying is that the motivation to do the mitzvah should be such that if there were no such thing as the world to come, the motivation would be the same. Since the motivation for doing the mitzvah is not for the world to come, so if there weren't any world to come, what difference does it make? Motivation is because of, it's the emes in this world, the most important possible thing. It's the highest possible priority in this world. That's what makes it the thing to do, according to this highest level of motivation. That being the case, if there were no world to come, it would still be the best thing to do. Yeah.
This is very. This is easier to apply to like rule and things like that, and mitzvahs that are like give tzedakah and things like that, then, for example, in Tzilas Yadayim, which is kind of like you're just washing your hands. You don't really feel a certain motivation.
Let's see if I can get if I can. Let me give you an example. Maybe, I don't know if this will help or not, but let me try. Suppose I say, he promised to come. I promised to come. I will promise to come. They promised to come. All of that on one side versus I promise to come. What's the difference? He promised to come. I promised, past tense, to come. I will promise, future tense, to come. They promised to come. Versus, I promise to come. What's the difference? Only in the last case, I'm making a promise. All the other cases, I'm describing what happened. Just describing what people did. The gigantic difference between describing promising as thing that some people have done versus making a promise which puts me under a moral obligation. So now, the question is, what are you doing when you wash your hands? Maybe they're dirty and you'd wash them if you were a Chinese. That's not doing a mitzvah. Doing a mitzvah is doing the will of the Creator. It's not a question of, is it water on my hands or not on my hands? Or maybe it's water on my shoes. I mean, that's not the issue. The issue is, am I doing the will of the Creator of the universe? The same pouring of water might be doing the will of the universe. It might not. I might be washing my hands when there's no mitzvah to wash my hands. When you're doing it as fulfilling the will of the Creator of the universe, it has an entirely different meaning. Not just water on hands. He wants me to do it. I'm doing it because He wants me to do it. I'm doing what He wants because I love Him. That makes it a very different thing. You know, I could write a happy birthday letter, right? I could write a happy birthday letter and ask my wife, listen, I want you to tell me whether this is well written and whether it's worthy of sending or whether it should be changed in some ways, and she'll do that for me, right? That's quite different from me writing a happy birthday letter to her from me, signed, love, hubby. Right? That's very different. Because then I'm congratulating her on her birthday. In the other first case, I'm just practicing my writing to see maybe the same words, but it doesn't have the same effect. The context in this case is everything. Okay, so now he goes on in paragraph 4. In a similar manner, the great sages would command the more understanding and brilliant among their students in private. What he said before, this is something which only after a certain level of understanding and information and ability, do not be like the servants who serve their master for the sake of receiving a reward, although reward here is not the right translation according to Rambam himself. Rather, since he is the master, it is fitting to serve him out of love. So this is in Pirkei Avos. What is Pirkei Avos? The ethics of the fathers. So first of all, as the Bartanura points out, the book begins with a record of the transmission of the Torah from God to Moses down through the generations, which means to say that the mottos or adages that are described, are recorded in the Pirkei Avos are not Jewish folk wisdom. And you can prove that because one of the sages' contribution to Pirkei Avos is a verse in the Tanakh, word for word. It's not his at all. He didn't make it up at all. He just quoted it. So what is it? These are statements by which you could live, statements around which you could build your service of God or your religious identity. And each one had different ones because it came from a different perspective. Now, you read this in Pirkei Avos. Some people read Pirkei Avos several times a year. But you're reading what one sage said to his students, not talking to you. So when you read that, you think, okay, that's what he said. That must be a very high idea. True, must be very important. Me? I don't know, these are ideals. It's nice to know that they exist, and maybe I'll try to move myself in that direction. There are a lot of them, 5 full chapters of Mishnah, plus a chapter of 6th chapter from the Svarim. I don't know. He's talking now about the master teaching his disciples. This teaching says the Rambam, was taught only in private to those who are on a very high level, because they're now qualified to be instructed to start to serve God out of love. And it starts with a negative. Don't serve out of a desire for a good outcome. Serve out of love. Now I say the translation of reward is inappropriate, because the Rambam in his commentary on Pirkei Avos says the word there in the Mishnah is pras. Pras is not the same as schar. Pras is like a gift. So he says, since God is the master, you owe him service. He doesn't owe you anything. And if you serve him with all your heart and your soul, you haven't earned any leverage on him that he owes you a compensation or a payment. So you can't talk about reward. Reward's not in the offing. And even if you would imagine that, okay, he doesn't owe me, I owe him infinity, there's no possibility of his owing me anything, but still, if I do work hard and I do serve him with great fidelity, I would hope that he would just give me something extra to show me the greatness of what I've done. No, don't do that either. Not even for a pras, says the Rabbi. Because then it's not out of love. It's for the sake of something which is going to be coming back. We're going to be given back for the sake of something other than the opportunity to do the service itself. Yeah.
Maybe this is personal, so you don't have to answer, but within your life, do you think you reached that point? And if you did, what was that process for you?
It's first of all, it is too personal, but I think the Rambam in the Gemara describes himself, and he says that he's not on that level, certainly not continuously. It's something which you can achieve in moments. There can be moments of outpouring of this kind of relationship, but it comes and goes. It's not something which most people achieve like Abraham did. So it's a piecemeal thing, but it can be done piecemeal, and then you try to make it as deeper and as constant as possible.
And just to clarify, the reason that's so difficult to keep it continuous is because it requires a relinquishing of self, you're totally giving up yourself? Or?
No, I don't think it's that. I think let me leave it for now. It's going a little too far afield. Okay, we're on to page 3. Anyone who occupies himself with the Torah in order to receive a reward or in order to protect himself from retribution is considered as one who is not occupied for God's sake. Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken here, this opens up a whole important, somewhat difficult issue. The word, when he translates, for God's sake, the word in Hebrew is lishma. Okay. We have a lot of literature which says that when you do mitzvos, when you learn Torah, it should be done lishma. In fact, there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos which says, Halomei Torah zoch ledvarim harbe. Someone who learns Torah merits many things, and he gives a long list of the great things that are merited. And I quote that Mishnah often to people, and we talk about it for a while. And I say, by the way, did you notice I didn't quote it correctly? Halomei Torah zoch ledvarim harbe. See, so he learns Torah, he merits a lot of things. Yeah, I left out a word, lishma. Many people don't even notice I left the word out. That's not good, because it only follows for people who do it lishma. Now, what does lishma mean? Well, literally, in a dictionary, lishma would mean for its own sake. But now, how are we going to understand that word in a context, especially in a religious context? let's see, he's studying Torah for its own sake. Well, that's not to be called rabbi. That would be for the honor he gets from it. That would not be hired as a teacher of rabbinics. He's going to get money for it. Okay. It's not because he wants to get into the world to come. That's a benefit he wants to get from it. That's not lishma. I wonder, would lishma be maybe that he just finds the Torah interesting and he's learning it because he wants to know it. That's all. Not for any other external purpose. Is that what the Rambam is talking about? That that's what you should do? You should learn it lishma for its own sake? Let me tell you about what I heard about when I first tripped to Johannesburg 42 years ago. I heard about a group of Jewish men who used to get together once a week to study Talmud together. 2-hour shot, once a week. From all over the city they came on Saturday afternoon. They didn't walk. Came by car. Because they enjoyed learning Talmud. They weren't going to make any money from it. No one's going to call them rabbi. They're certainly not going to get the world to come from it. Not if they're driving there. They did it because they were interested in Torah. Is that what the Rambam's talking about? Doing it lishma for its own sake? I don't think so. And in fact, he's going to describe for us and say that lishma means the same thing as serving God out of love. So don't make a mistake about this. The Rambam is quite clear that lishma, we'll read it. Well, let's read it. We have a couple of minutes. In contrast, anyone who occupies himself with it, with Torah, not because of fear, nor to receive a reward, but because of his love for the Lord of the entire earth who commanded it, because of his love for the Adon Kol Haaretz, the master of the whole earth, who commanded it, the Shetziva Kate, is one who occupies it himself with it, the Shema. The Shema is doing it out of love for the master of the earth who commanded it. And for those of you who are familiar with the Nefesh HaChaim, the Nefesh HaChaim is not cholek on the Rambam. Sorry. Nobody's cholek on this Rambam. So you may have heard, or even perhaps even read, that the Nefesh HaChaim says that when you're learning a Tosfos, what you should have in mind is the Tosfos, and that's what Lishma is, and he quotes a Rosh to that effect. That's not a disagreement with this. Not at all. Here there are two different subjects. One is, what's my motivation for doing the mitzvah of learning Torah? That's one. And the other is, how do you do the mitzvah? What do you have in mind when you're doing the mitzvah? Not what reason you're doing it for, but how do you do it? What's the process of performing it? And there, he says, when you're learning the Tosfos, your mind should be occupied with coming to understand the Tosfos because that's the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to understand the Tosfos. So by focusing your mind on understanding the Tosfos, you're acting out your love for the master of the whole world who commanded it, and you're doing out of love what he wants you to do to express your love, which is focus on the Tosfos to understand it. But lishma, which carries on for all mitzvos, is to do it out of love for the master of the world who commanded it. That's what lishma means. Yeah.
So what you're saying is lishma is lemaaseh. When you do something with lishma, when you learn Torah lishma, you're learning how to properly do it and with the intention of doing it. So it's also lemaaseh.
Well, that's true, but that's a corollary, as we say in mathematics. That's something that follows from the axiom. It's a theorem. The axiom is you're doing it out of love. Now, of course, a great deal of studying Torah is studying rules for action. So, if you're doing it out of love for the one who commanded it, then of course you're looking forward, like he said before, his delight is in doing those mitzvos. He's now finding out what mitzvos need to be done. Indeed, there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos which says, someone whose actions are greater than his wisdom will stand. So his wisdom is greater than his actions, wisdom won't stand. Beni Yonah, in the Shari Tshuva, asks, what do you mean that his actions are greater than his wisdom? How does he do that? How can you do what you don't know? And he gives a very striking answer. he says, imagine someone sitting down to learn Gemara. Okay, there are a lot of volumes of Gemara. It's pretty big, Sitting down to learn Gemara. What's his attitude? His attitude is, this is the will and the wisdom of the Creator, and I'm learning this in order to do it. He gets credit for everything in it as if he's done it already. Wow is right. That's how his actions, not his real actions, but his credit for his actions, can be achieved before he knows. So of course, the goal is from learning it to come to do it. No question about that. But the learning of it as a mitzvah is done out of love for the master of the earth who commanded me to learn it. That's what's motivating me. Now, what Nefesh Chaim is talking about is something more delicate. How do you act it out? Should you think about that the whole time? Should your soul be in rapture while you're trying to learn the Tosfos? Probably not, because you probably won't understand the Tosfos. Right? Even though maybe some others disagree with that. But so there's time before you learn to meditate a bit on this is what the Creator wants from me and the expression of love, and afterwards to be grateful. And maybe if it's a long learning session, to interrupt in the middle for a few moments. But yeah, I'm speaking for the Nefesh Chaim now. There are other ways other positions, but for the Nefesh Chaim. So then, that's the mental set you have when you're doing it. But that doesn't contradict the concept of the Shema that the Rambam is talking about here. Whereas I know nobody disagrees with this. This is the definition of Shema. This is absolutely crucial. So I'll just finish the paragraph, then we have to quit for today. Therefore, he says, when one teaches children, women, and the most common people, one should teach them to serve out of fear and in order to receive a reward. So for the 16th time, that can't be wrong. It can't be bad. It can't be evil. You teach them to do that. As their knowledge grows and their wisdom increases, this secret should be revealed to them bit by bit, slowly. They should become accustomed to this concept gradually until they grasp it and know it and begin serving God out of love. And as I have mentioned now 6 times, women are included here. So women are also included in achieving this highest level of serving God. It's not prejudicial in that way. It mentions women because their education was slower. It took longer time. It took time over longer years. Yeah. Okay, tomorrow it's Hashem. We'll finish. You're very welcome.